I was at the community swimming pool with my father and older sister, who's 3 years my senior. We had been frolicking in the water but were soon told to vacate for an adult-only swim session. I couldn't grasp why we had to exit. The pool seemed vast enough and there weren't many people around. Nevertheless, I complied, sort of. Our towels were stationed by the deep end, and while my father took his laps and my sister sat out, I stood there, gazing into the water. A thought struck me. I could probably make a hard jump, sink straight to the bottom, touch it with my feet, then push off to the surface, grab the pool's edge, and hoist myself out. I wasn't entirely convinced my plan would work, but before I knew it, I had leapt in. The moment I jumped, I heard my sister's voice piercing through the air, calling for my father. That was fortunate, because things didn't proceed as I had envisioned. Suddenly, I was spinning uncontrollably, taking in water instead of holding my breath, frustrated by my inability to halt the spinning. Then, almost as if awakening from a daze, I found myself at the bottom of the pool. The chaotic spinning ceased, and I felt a wave of relief. Oddly, I felt great and in total control of my movements, swimming effortlessly. Breathing didn't even cross my mind. I figured I should head back up, execute my original plan. But as I ascended, I noticed my sister staring down at the ground from the poolside, not at me. My father and a few others were engrossed in something on the ground. I initially thought they saw I was swimming fine and had turned their attention elsewhere. However, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to surface to see what had captivated their attention. As I ascended, suddenly to my left, a group of figures emerged underwater. They resembled a living nativity scene. The sight was startling. Vivid colors of their garments made them look surreal and out of place. I halted, transfixed, trying to comprehend their presence. They all looked downward, as if actors in a play awaiting their cue. My eyes were drawn to Mary, clad in an intensely blue robe. I presumed baby Jesus was there in a manger, though I don't recall seeing him. A man in brown held a shepherd's staff, but my gaze was fixed on Mary. When she lifted her head and smiled at me, a profound sense of love and importance overwhelmed me. It was the most exquisite feeling I'd ever experienced. I smiled back, feeling an inexplicable connection, as if I'd always known her. I just wanted to be with her and started moving towards her when suddenly it felt like I was being yanked out of the water. I took a huge breath and I was on the side of the pool with my sister and father. My father was standing by the fence and my sister was close to me. I looked around because I had no idea who had just pulled me out of the water. I felt confused and realized my father was really angry with me. He looked like he had tears in his eyes. My father never got mad at me, but he was telling me I was so selfish and saying other things that I can't remember. I didn't understand because just a minute ago he didn't seem to even care that I was in the water. When my father was done scolding me, I looked at my sister who was glaring at me with her hands on her hips, but then her face softened and she asked me if I had been scared. I looked around to make sure my father wasn't near. Then I shook my head no and told her it was really fun. Then she yelled at me and told me I better not do it again. When we walked back home, we talked about other things, so I was relieved that my father seemed to be back to his old self again. But as soon as we got in the house, he went directly to my mother and told her that he thought he'd lost me and was agitated all over again. My mother quietly talked to me later and told me that I had really upset my father and better not do anything like that again. Later that week, we went to my uncle's house and my aunt was asking me a lot of questions. She asked if I saw Jesus, but she held up a statue of a grown Jesus, so I said no. Then she asked me to point at who I saw, so I pointed at a nativity scene and she said, "Oh, baby Jesus, you saw baby Jesus." Then looked at my parents and said, "So she died." My dad got super upset again, and that was the last time it was ever brought up, other than one time years later when my dad and I were watching TV, and he said to me that if he had lost me that day at the pool, he wouldn't have been able to go on. For years, the incidents of that day didn't make sense to me. I thought that maybe when a person begins to drown, it must make them feel really good. I assumed I must have hallucinated seeing Mary and the others. And that really confused me because at my age I knew nothing about religion or death, and a nativity scene, as far as I knew, was totally associated with Christmas. So why in the middle of summer did I hallucinate a Christmas scene? My father being so mad at me didn't make sense. He was always fun and loving and hardly ever got mad at us. I felt his reaction was over the top and totally not typical of him. I would think about the events of that day from time to time, but would just shrug about how it really didn't make sense. One day in the summer of 2021, my sister and I were talking about that day, and I said, "I must have been really groggy when I was pulled out of the water." She looked at me totally surprised and said, "You weren't breathing. You needed to be resuscitated." I was shocked. I would accept groggy and hallucinating, but I knew I definitely wasn't unconscious. More confusion. Months later, I was watching YouTube videos and came across an NDE. I found it fascinating and searched for more. I watched as many as I could find. As people were explaining what happened to them, I immediately knew that what they were saying was true. Eventually, I realized that something about their stories felt familiar, and started to search through events of my past in my mind to see if I could pinpoint what was familiar. When I thought about the day at the pool, I thought that couldn't be it because I was just in the pool swimming, and it hit me that I didn't know how to swim because that's how I got into trouble in the first place. Then I realized that I never came up for air once I woke up on the bottom of the pool. But what really shocked me was when I realized what everyone must have been looking at on the side of the pool while I was in the water. Of course, my father wouldn't have been okay with leaving me in the deep end while busy with something else. They were busy with my body trying to resuscitate me while I was having a great time in the water. Everything made sense. My poor father would have had every reason to be horrified. My first thought was, thank God children don't suffer when they die. Then I thought, we don't really die, we just move on, and we bring our whole personalities with us. I was so much myself when I was still in the water that I had no idea I was dead. For some reason, I don't think I was supposed to see that I had died. The nativity scene stopped me from going up to see what was going on. This story was shared by Janice F. and happened a long time ago in 1968.